Hi everyone, thank you for attending today's webinar brought to you by UNCDF CleanStart and Columbia SIPA with support from the Embassy of Sweden in Uganda. My name is Teresa. I support partnerships for the CleanStart program, and I'm joined by colleagues in Kampala, Washington, D.C., and New York City. I will give an introduction to UNCDF, the CleanStart program, and where this project began. UNCDF makes public and private finance work for the poor in the world's 47 least developed countries. With its capital mandate and instruments, UNCDF offers last-mile finance models that unlocks public and private resources, especially at the domestic level, to reduce poverty and support local economic development. UNCDF's CleanStart Global Program was founded in 2012, focusing on getting low-income households and MSMEs a jumpstart on using clean energy. By 2020, CleanStart aims to have over 500,000 households and micro-entrepreneurs make the switch to clean energy, which translates into 2.5 million people benefiting altogether. To this end, CleanStart promotes access to finance across the energy value chain, from the energy enterprise to the end user, by investing in early-stage innovative business ideas, from SMEs that have the potential to make a step change in improving the accessibility, affordability, and reliability of modern energy for underserved people, especially those at the last mile. To date, CleanStart has supported 32 financial institutions and energy service providers to receive grant funding through open competitive processes, namely challenge funds. These partners have focused on improving the affordability of solar home systems, biogas, and fuels through microloans or pay-go financing mechanisms, and have enabled CleanStart to reach 177,000 households or 880,000 people in Nepal, Uganda, Myanmar, and Cambodia with access to affordable clean energy solutions. In 2016, the Renewable Energy Challenge Fund in Uganda was launched in partnership with the Embassy of Sweden. RECF aims to support 153,000 households in Uganda to access clean energy solutions. In this challenge fund process, we implemented a window for clean cooking solutions and solar PV solutions linked to productive use, household, and institutional purposes. Through these windows, over 130 clean energy companies entered our challenge fund, and 15 partners have been selected, including 6 clean cooking partners. For UNCDF CleanStart, the challenge fund process goes beyond selecting and supporting a few innovations to enable market transformation and increase the affordable supply of sustainable clean energy solutions. Our hands-on challenge fund process is our market scoping mechanism, helping us build awareness and linkages across the sector between funders, incubators, and energy companies across value chains. It helps us understand where companies are and where they desire to be, what they desire to implement, and what resources they seek to get there. In order to build up the market, especially the clean cooking market, we hope to support more companies to improve their business and become investment ready. And this will require technical assistance in addition to grant funding for the whole sector. We asked ourselves, how can we create more winners for the future and more winners for other opportunities too? With the application data we've collected on companies, how can we bring that information back to them, suggest some improvements and support services, and increase their chances of receiving support, whether technical assistance, publicity, awards, or investment in the future, so that market transformation is not narrowed down to the selection of a couple successful companies, but we can narrow the gap between winners and losers. I would now like to introduce our main speaker for today's webinar, who is part of the Columbia Capstone team that UNCDF partnered with for this project. Frank Bagidi is a certified analyst in international strategy. He currently works as an analyst to the Vice President for Infrastructure of the World Bank. Previously, he worked as a junior international affairs associate at the Paris office of the World Bank, supporting the institution's country dialogue with French stakeholder groups and analyzing data on European policy trends. Passionate about sustainable development, climate change, and renewable energy, Frank has undertaken occasional consultancy work on carbon risk management for the European Investment Bank and participated in the Capstone project on clean cooking enterprises with UNCDF. A French native and Beninese national, Frank holds 3 bachelor and 4 master's degrees, including a master's in public administration from Columbia SIPA.
Thank you so much, Teresa. So as Teresa said, beyond grants, the UNCDF CleanStart team felt that many applicants would benefit from some sort of external help to support their business growth through technical advice and recommendation. And this is why they teamed up with us, a Capstone team from Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs. We reviewed company data gathered during the application process with a specific focus on 23 companies, which are representative of the sector as a whole. Under the guidance of Professor Ellen Morris and Professor Phil LaRocco, both pioneers in energy access and energy finance, we worked for several months towards achieving one common goal, finding a way to narrow the gap between winners and losers and give tailored advice to companies to become more investment ready. So this is the agenda for this session. We'll start with some background information on the challenges of the clean cooking energy sector in Uganda. Then we'll cover the methodology that we adopted on what we call the doctor's visit. We will then focus on the key findings at the company level, the association level, but also the sector levels. And then we'll have a specific focus on the 4 categories or subsectors that we identified. We will then cover the possible solutions that we came up with, both when it comes to the sector coordination and capacity building, but also regarding the funding opportunities as well as the marketing strategies. We will also talk about the series of deliverables that we came up with from our final report to our database and website prototypes. And last but not least, we will cover the recommendation that we made to the key actors that are involved and that could inform some of you guys' work. So some background information to start off. While electrification in Uganda has increased steadily in the last decade, access to clean fuels and technology for cooking remains stagnant. As you can see, only 2% of the population has access to clean cooking solutions, while biomass still accounts for more than 90% of the total. And of course, this leads to a worrying level of deforestation in the country. Indoor air pollution is also a serious issue in Uganda. Women who use traditional cooking devices and children are the most affected groups and are exposed to it. And this has, negative impacts when it comes to stroke, heart disease, lung cancer, etc., and is responsible for more than 8% of infant deaths. And although government officials and NGOs are cognizant of the fact that the existing cooking practices have worrying impact on health and the environment, the progress that have been made in terms of transition to clean energy in Uganda are quite fragile and slow, and at least must be sustained. And this is why we came up with the following methodology to support the companies on the ground. So by combining the CleanStart data with clean energy and small enterprise sector expertise, we had an opportunity to test a new model of sector support. This is what we call the doctor's visit. Basically, we mimicked providing medical support to our patients. And this includes, pre-filling medical history forms. So we reviewed the applications submitted by the entrepreneurs and conducted extensive independent research on the clean cooking sector in Uganda. The second step was seeing the patient and asking for follow-up questions. We carried out field visits to each enterprise to confirm aspects of the business and gather more details through interviews on symptoms that influenced their investment readiness. And then the third step was setting up a treatment plan and prescribing support. To do so, we analyzed and synthesized data and information that we gathered from the visit and drafted cover letter treatment plans that prescribed support services and activities that could help companies become investment ready. Meeting the entrepreneurs allowed us to design specific prescriptions that could be seen as entry points for strengthening their companies over both the short and medium terms. Based on our research on our 23 companies and on the sector as a whole, we divided the clean cooking sector into the following 4 categories or subsectors relevant to the Ugandan market. So top left, you can see improved cookstove manufacturing companies. They represent the biggest sector. In the Ugandan market, the dominant products are still solid fuel stoves, which are an upgrade to traditional baseline biomass technologies in terms of fuel savings and fuel efficiency. The second category is briquettes and pellets production companies. They are mostly made of agricultural waste in different shapes and size. This subsector has mushroomed in the past few years, partly because of the increasing price of charcoal and the accelerated deforestation. Third category is what we call the other fuels. So there is a smaller growth that has been observed in the LPG and biogas companies. Of course, the international oil and gas giants such as Shell and Total still dominate the local LPG sector, but some startups have begun to shake up the status quo with new technologies and business model. And then the last category is what we call the distribution retail company, and they support the other sectors. Most distribution companies actually operate in an integrated way with other subsectors of the market. And generally, cookstoves at a pre-distribution level are sold on a wholesale basis to distributors and vendors. Now, what we think is probably the most important part is our key findings. First off, at the company level, we found that there is a lack of access to information on improved technologies, equipment suppliers, and relevant industry events in the region, meaning in East Africa. Companies find it difficult to gather information that they want to improve their operation. For instance, entrepreneurs of briquette companies usually require, they need many days just for the drying process. So there is a demand for information on techniques to speed up the drying process, but entrepreneurs do not have access to such information yet. It would also be helpful if the companies could be provided with information on some qualified and reliable suppliers of manufacturing machineries. Another important point is the inadequate business training. Most entrepreneurs express the need for more practical training on finance, accounting, marketing, and business strategy. It is also quite hard for some of them to find out about the grants that are available and how to develop high quality proposals and budget. Another problem would be regarding distributions. So firstly, for customers in rural areas, they are often scattered, which makes it hard for a single company to reach out to a wide range of customers and distribute their products in those areas. Secondly, inaccurate and unreliable geolocalization systems and maps in Uganda make it quite difficult and oftentimes inefficient to distribute effectively and efficiently. And thirdly, product demand is hard to anticipate and predict, which then makes it even more difficult for companies to generate accurate and realistic forecasts. Last but not least, when it comes to the company level, there is, for many companies, a lack of marketing strategies. They have limited access to their market and have difficulties to reach out to their customers. And most of them just rely on very simple demonstrations in villages. Briefly, at the association level, we found that most of the association all face the same challenges in terms of staff, funding, reputation, effective communication, and service provision to entrepreneurs, which prevent them from maximizing their potential and serve as focal points to their targeted companies. And then on top of this, there is also a lack of coordinated efforts among the association, as well as a lack of reliable and up-to-date data available. Now, when it comes to the sector level, we found that there is a limited access to commercial loans to those entrepreneurs. Loans from local banks are not accessible to most companies, especially startups, because on one hand, commercial banks are reluctant to provide loans to companies because they are concerned about the default risks on the loan. And on the other hand, high borrowing rates from banks, which are quite common in Uganda, prevent companies from obtaining loans and raising capital to support their business development. There's also a lack of awareness and insufficient awareness raising campaign at the policy level, as well as a lack of sector standardization. In the Uganda market, we find that the performance of the products remain uneven due to the lack of product standards. And this makes it difficult for customers to identify and distinguish good quality products from others. Last but not least, there is also a lack of awareness on the health and environmental positive impact of clean cooking. Many Ugandan people do not realize the dreadful results caused by dirty cooking, such as the disease that I mentioned earlier, or the accelerated rate of the deforestation in the country. Now, when it comes to the key findings specific to the 4 subsectors that we identified, when it comes to improved cook stoves, we found that there's a heavy reliance on manual labor, as well as some tax issue because of the level of the high VAT tax and import taxes. When it comes to briquettes and pellets, the weak drying process and the weak drying capacity is an issue, as well as the difficulties in terms of marketing, which also manifests in sales. And the sector also poses many technological challenges. When it comes to distribution and retail, purchasing inventory takes up a large percentage of the working capital of distribution company, and this is something that they would like to reduce. And when it comes to other fuels, so biogas and LPG, for biogas, it's costly, it's water intensive, and it's also not easy to move from one place to another. And then for LPG, it's also very costly and capital intensive, and there's a heavy reliance on import. It was interesting for us to kind of like do a mapping of the series of challenges and to see what were the common trends, what were the challenges that were more common than others in our subset of companies. And when it comes to like the top 2 of the most common challenges, we found that the online presence and the distribution process were the main ones. When it comes to the other important challenges, we can list marketing, accounting, and finance. Those are areas where entrepreneurs made sure that we know that they needed more training and just knowledge, basically. And then other issues include business plan writing efforts, as well as staff training and the production process, which also confirm what we saw on the ground. Now we're going to talk about the possible solutions. When it comes to sector coordination, we found that coming up with an interactive website that would be managed by association could be a great way to bridge the gap and close the gap regarding the online presence for companies. Association could operate and kind of like manage this interactive website and help set up the communication channels for the companies by gathering their information and stories and circulating them in their newsletters. The other point regarding the sector coordination was expanding capacities of association by the government or development actors. That is something that is quite hard to do, but we thought that government and donors could support association so that they could hire new staff members, do more outreach, and provide value-added services to member companies, for instance. Now, when it comes to capacity building, we thought that communicating with international organizations could be a good thing for local associations to strengthen their ties with such organizations so that they could bring the best regional and global practices to local companies. Domestic associations could also actively seek out the support of international development institutions to help Ugandan companies solve some of their problems in terms of technology, financial resources, and business operation strategies. When it comes to reshaping the association landscape, the underlying idea is stronger together. By merging resources, funding, staff, knowledge, and know-how, association could be bigger and have a more significant impact. And the last one is the company training platform. Association could provide platforms to ensure that new companies could learn from established and successful ones via practical peer learning, sharing, training sessions. Now, the third category is commercial loans. If companies could have access to loan guarantees, they may be able to get lower interest rates from banks. We found that banks would be maybe less concerned then about their default risk. So an idea is that development agency could maybe help companies negotiate lower interest rates from commercial banks through cost sharing, as well as risk sharing initiatives in the forms of guarantees, for instance. Regarding distribution, improving mapping system is something that could be great, and that would be really, really useful on the ground. Also focusing on a pay lender model and maybe extending it would be great. One of the companies that we worked with pretty much solved its briquette distribution problem by deciding to no longer doing public demonstration, but paying a small amount of rent to retail shops directly. And that way, they made sure that briquettes were actually present in the shops and directly competing and put side to side with charcoal, which is also sold through the same small retail shops. Another idea that we had was to partner with Boda Boda and international organization or saving groups. Collaborating with Boda Boda drivers would be a good idea because they could then distribute small numbers of cook stove or packs of briquettes, for instance. And it would also have the advantage of not being cost intensive at all. Another value chain improvement would involve setting distribution hubs in rural areas. Companies could work together to deliver the product to the hubs, which could save time and distribution costs. When it comes to marketing strategy, companies could maybe conduct some market survey or researches. So one of the approaches for the market research could be to select one village or a small set of villages as a pilot, and then figure out the demand and sales potential there, and then use the data to predict the demand in other villages of the same size. They could also outsource the market research and maybe try to sign contracts with entities such as schools, restaurants, or bakeries to have a better idea of the demand. They would then have a clear plan as to when and where they need to deliver their product, as well as the quantity. Now, when it comes to advocacy and awareness, standardized tests would be very important moving forward, we thought. So the Center for Research in Energy and Energy Conservation, CREEC, in Uganda, is currently conducting cookstove tests in laboratories. And we thought that local association and others should consider maybe exploring some sort of ongoing dialogues or maybe partnerships even with CREEC and donors in order to lower the financial barriers for cookstove companies so that they could get their products tested and certified at a reasonable price. Another important point is the awareness raising programs. Raising awareness on the health and environmental benefits is quite important, we thought. And this could be done through national campaigns or local campaigns, which would require some sort of government or at least public sector participation. So armed with all those possible ideas and the background research that we conducted, we came up with a series of deliverables, starting with our final report, which I would say was pretty much the same format as this presentation, but with more detail, obviously. We also came up with a series of cover letters listing prescriptions to companies with possible near-term priorities that they could consider and seek support from donors and other providers. On top of cover letters, we also drafted a series of 2-page company profiles for each of the 23 companies that we worked with, basically to tell each enterprise's story and attract potential donor and investor. By doing so, we wanted to bridge the gap when it comes to the marketing tools and the marketing material. And then the last point was the website prototype with a database feature. We wanted to establish a database to store information on each of the clean cooking companies that we worked on to foster information sharing among entrepreneurs and other key players in the clean cooking sectors in Uganda. So this is to give you an idea of what a cover letter looked like. So 2-page document listing the main areas for improvement and kind of like giving a very concrete, practical roadmap to achieve that. This is an example of a company profile. We wanted something that was visually appealing and that would really list the numerous achievements of each of the companies that we worked on, so that potential investors could see the actual potential of such companies. This is the website database prototype that we worked on. The idea was to have something that was quite interactive and that entrepreneurs could update on their own. So this would be, I guess, the homepage where companies could register. This would be, on your left, you see the company profiles would be all listed there, and people could just click on it and then have an idea of the main achievements of each companies. And on the right side, we would like to put some suppliers information. The website would also have a tab including all the upcoming events and grant opportunities available for the potential grantees or the different companies on the ground. That way we would bridge the communication gap. And we also wanted to have a section dedicated to ongoing dialogue amongst entrepreneurs, associations, and development partners. This is what we call the Clean Cooking Forum. Lastly, I will go over the recommendation for the sector and also to the key actors. We divided them into 2 sections. First, enabling fundings, and then the other one is the support on the overall growth of the sector. When it comes to funding, we thought that simplifying application processes in general might really help because a lot of companies do not necessarily have proper financial statements, so there is a risk that they put random numbers for their sales or for the profit that they have made so far. We also thought that trying to overcome the language barrier through translation would be a good idea. Sometimes, company founders and managers whose native language is not English, they rely on staff members to complete the grant application. And in that process, sometimes important and relevant content gets lost in translation. And we thought that maybe having them doing the application in the native language and then translating it would give us a better idea of what they're really trying to do, what is the message that they're trying to convey, and where is it that they're trying to go. All these to get a better sense of the startup. We also thought that it would be great to try to make easier comparison from one company to another through simple quantitative questions. So due to the startup nature of most of the companies, we thought that it would make sense to ask data about short periods of time instead of longer periods of time, just to know what it is that they're working on and what are the results that they've gotten, say, in the last 2 months and in the last 6 months. But trying to assess their entire evolution from day 1 to today might be a bit tricky because oftentimes the first few months are really tough. So taking that into consideration might be unfair to some of the companies. And then lastly, we thought that shortlisting companies and setting up interview would be a good layer to add on to the application process. Because then, you would get, development actors would get a sense of who is actually owning the companies, how are they working, and then entrepreneurs could make a demonstration of their product on site. And so that might give a better idea of what it is that they're actually doing rather than just scanning through applications. Second category is the support on overall growth of the clean cooking sector. It would be great if we could find ways to provide affordable finance to companies. Many entrepreneurs had difficulties in borrowing money from banks because of the very high interest and because of the skepticism of commercial banks regarding their credit worthiness. So development actors could offer loans with lower interest rates and guarantees to companies that are looking for that specific type of support. It would be also great if we could help develop industry standards because most companies struggle to prove the quality of their products on the market. And then further advocating for the removal of import taxes on clean cook stove and fuel could also be done on the policy level through policy outreach. And last but not least, we thought that it would be important to support the development of an effective sector association. Basically, the idea is that with some sort of very, very, very negligible financial support, association could have a much bigger impact. And this is something that could be very beneficial to the companies on the ground. And with that, this is the end of the presentation portion of this webinar. Feel free to ask us any questions. From both Uganda, New York, or Washington, we'll be very glad to answer your questions. So you can type your question directly in the dedicated section, and we will take those questions one by one. So you can ask for us to clarify one point or maybe raise another topic that would be related to how to transform clean cooking in Uganda. So do we have any questions so far? So I see one question. What are the program's next step to implement these issues? Okay, so basically we were a capstone team from Columbia University, right? So we were just testing out ideas. And we came up with this doctor's visit, and we also came up with these solutions, and we came up with those recommendations. There's not necessarily a next step for this program because the project ended for us, but it could definitely be beneficial for different development actors who would want to chime in on the ground to take some note from what we did and then implement the specific next steps, right? So I'm talking about, say, the website. I'm talking about the support to associations. I'm talking about helping with, very, very small things such as the map issue. I'm talking about reaching out to government at the policy level regarding national programs to raise awareness on the health issues. Those type of things are issues that we raised, and that could be then, I guess, managed and worked on by other development actors, both local and international ones in Uganda.
Mm-hmm. And from the UNCDF side, thanks for asking this question. It's really informed how we provide technical assistance complementary to the funding that we provide, whether that's a concessional loan or more grant funding. Our aim was just to see a very light touch approach to diagnosing issues for companies and seeing what issues were observed amongst multiple companies, and how we get support to them via training opportunities, integrating some of this information into our think shops, our coursework, and new funding rounds. This does inform our thinking, but it does definitely take coordination with other actors in the sector, especially associations. So we'll move to, let me scan questions now. So there's a question on what the primary source of funding for startups and enterprises, such as the ones in Uganda today. Is it largely private capital from outside, foundation funding? It sounds like the root cause is to find sources of cheap capital and make the markets less risky for investors.
You want to take this one?
Yeah.
So this is Julius from UNCDF in Kampala. So most of the companies in the clean cooking space are actually self-funded. So they're using their own resources to fund the businesses. To some extent, a number of companies have benefited from grants from development partners and a number of donors. Before there were issues in the markets for carbon financing, a number of companies also did get, some funding from, carbon credits and carbon financing generally. There are few companies that have been able to access loans or any kind of debt from, financial institutions because of the challenges that Frank has mentioned. But nevertheless, we see an opportunity to continue providing technical assistance and getting the company's investment ready. And that's what part of the UNCDF grant is going to. How do we support these companies in a very catalytic way so that they can become investment ready and access other forms of funding other than just grants? So yes, there is need for cheaper sources of funding, but there is also need to support companies so that they can become fundable, if you may wish.
So there's a question on when will the learnings be made public? So it is public at the moment, but after the webinar, we'll send the report from the Columbia team out to all the participants, and we'll also upload it to the UNCDF website.
There is a question on the doctor's visit. I can go back to that slide quite briefly. Okay, so there you go. So it's a three-step process. First one was reviewing the application. Second one was carrying out field visits, a study visit on the ground, and gathering details through interviews with the different companies and entrepreneurs. And then the third step was designing cover letters, treatment plans to provide actual support to the companies. And we did that with a subset of 23 companies with good feedback from them, and most importantly, great enthusiasm throughout the entire process. So we were able to come up with a pretty detailed level of information and of prescriptions for each company.
Yeah, and just to add to that in terms of next step, the idea is really that the companies that were visited, they have with them a cover letter that says some of the areas the team felt they needed improvement in order to become investment ready. And then they have the company profile that really is a marketing tool for their successes and what they're really doing, because one of the biggest challenges is publicity and awareness. So those two combined, we hope that the companies will feel equipped to bring those to other funders, to bring those to other resources and say, we had somebody do a diagnostic on us, and this is what we really need to become investment ready, and this is the amount of funding we're looking for. But as a precursor to that, we really need technical assistance or a bit more training or non-financial support to get to that point. And here is a company profile really showcasing what our company is. So a possible next step for UNCDF, now that the companies do have these documents, is as we do, pointing them in the right directions of opportunities and making sure that they use the information that the team gave them to demonstrate what their needs are and how they can get there.
Okay, so I see a comment on, I think the same issue I think the same issue exists in Ghana. Is it possible to replicate the same process in Ghana. I think what was interesting with this particular project was that we found that there were similar issues in East Africa. Now, we didn't expand our research to West Africa or other region of the continent, but it would be, you're right, it would be interesting to kind of like do some sort of comparative study and see what are the common threads. With that being said, we also want to maybe focus on the specificities of each country, because sometimes even within one region, we would find one sector popping up more than another. So I'm sure it's a model that can be replicated in Ghana, especially the doctor's visit. It's a matter of identifying a good subset of companies and then of doing it on the ground, most importantly.
Thanks, Frank. So there's a question regarding the companies that were visited. Solar Cooking Uganda. Do you know if this may be the same group as Solar Connect Association? It's not.
Oh, I see the question.
Yeah.
Table 1 in the group list a group called Solar Cooking Uganda, but I am unaware of that group name. Do you know if this may be the same group as the Solar Connect Association? Okay, so let me try back to the table. Is this this one on the company? Wait, on what table?
Yeah, so under distribution. Yeah, it's not the same.
Oh, it's not the same. I think they're different.
Okay, so how do these companies reach out to end users today? It depends on as you can see in this company overview, a lot of these companies fall along different parts of the value chain. And some of them face end users more, and some of them are more production and manufacturing. There are many models to how they reach out to end users, some being via institutions and schools, some via demonstration events, some via having shops. I think Frank, you observed, and the team observed some other ways that companies met end users as well.
Yeah, I would say this is one area where they're being quite innovative, and they do their best to reach out to their end users, communicate with them. One of the companies I was working on actually had a WhatsApp group where they would communicate daily with the end users, providing content, providing feedbacks, sharing news, posting photos. So they would have that type of communication on a daily basis, and that would create a sense of community also. And also with word of mouth, he would get more customers that way. So that was something that I thought that was really interesting. It was a perfect case of what is working in my country, what is working in my region, what do people use, and how can I reach out to them that way? And the entrepreneur decided to do it through WhatsApp, and it was brilliant, and it works quite well.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us today, and thank you to Frank for presenting, and to the Columbia SIPA team for partnering with us on this project. If you have further questions, please feel free to email recf.uganda@uncdf.org, and I will send out the presentation and the final report to everybody who's registered for this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much.